Okay, we're starting over. It didn't look like I was muted a minute ago. My name's Alice Embree, she, her. We've got a lot of people in this virtual space, so please try to put your questions into the chat, and co-hosts are going to monitor those questions. And we're going to record this broadcast, and Audrey, I believe it will appear on Bookwoman's YouTube, correct? So thank you, Susan Post, for making this event possible at Bookwoman, an Austin feminist space that's now 45 years old. And I know some people, one person joining from Santiago, another from Belize, so I think we can call it a global gathering. Another person was going to come in from Canada. I hope she makes it. So welcome to my friends from University Junior High, Students for a Democratic Society, the RAG, the Audacious Women's Community of the 70s, the Austin Committee for Human Rights in Chile, and also from my 8 to 5 work life at UT and at the Child Support Division of the Attorney General's Office. As a TSEU union member, go union, and also as a retiree activist working with Code Pink, Under the Hood, Democratic Socialists of America's Feminist Action Committee, and recently the Texas Alliance for Retired Americans. Go Senior Power. Our community lost 2 friends recently, Joanne Mullert, who worked at Red River Women's Press, and Pat Kramer, union shuttle bus driver and LGBT activist extraordinaire. And these losses are reminders to me of the urgency to record and archive our shared history. The Briscoe Center for American History at UT has been a collaborator on this front, welcoming papers and oral histories, and they published this book. Their editing, proofing, designing made it a beautiful book. And so thanks to the Briscoe folks who are here, particularly Holly Taylor, the editor, Allison Beck, and Aaron Purdy. I also want to thank the photographers, Elm Pogue, I don't see Robin Birdfeather yet, Stanley Farrar, John Avant, and all those who used their amazing talents to chronicle the 60s and the 70s and let their photos be used in the book. At this moment, it is hard to feel celebratory about our shared history as we face fires, floods, and hurricanes, and a Texas legislature that has inflicted such damage on reproductive justice, voting rights, teaching about racism, and more. However, it is a time to remember that solidarity strengthens all of us. So Voice Lessons, my book, I don't know how many of you have actually been able to look at it. It's my story that I touch on many stories and a shared history. And for me, the movements of the 60s and 70s were transformational and became the foundation for lifelong activism. So I'm hoping that this book celebrates that kind of lifelong struggle. There really aren't too many books that span the movements of the 60s and 70s, and not too many written by women, and very few that reflect the experience in Texas. So they tend to be more the experiences of the coasts. So I feel it's a contribution. So I'm gonna kind of go through scenes that are actually in the book, but that were formative for me. And when I was in the 11th grade, I went with the Austin High School drill squad to Corpus Christi, and Claudine Props was the only Black member of our drill squad. So after this bizarre delay, we entered a restaurant and got seated, and I was with Claudine and another white drill squad member at a table when the waitress came up and very sweetly said, "I am sorry, honey, but we just can't serve you." And I got up and I said, "Well, they won't serve Claudine, we need to leave." And all those other people on that drill squad looked at me, and one of them said, "But we just ordered." And So we left, the three of us left, we went to Woolworths, and when we returned, it was all treated as nothing to see here. And the school administrators never took responsibility for putting Glodine in that position. She dropped out of the drill squad the next year. There was nothing to see. And it was before really any of us, or at least anyone I knew how to make change. So when I entered the University of Texas in the fall of '63, we were living in the Jim Crow South, and UT dorms and sports were segregated. The campus interracial committee made a really gutsy decision, and it was shortly after the assassination of Kennedy, to picket the dorm where President Johnson's daughter was living. Well, it got a lot of press, and UT dropped their delay tactics and integrated UT housing before LBJ was to speak at the spring commencement in 1964. I learned a lot from those activists. Linda was probably one of them. I learned things that not just about segregation, but there were protests against fraternity minstrel shows and against slave auctions by fraternities and sororities. And those were things that Black students brought to white students' attention. And that was important to me too. So in the spring of my freshman year, 1964, I left Gregory Gym, and that was where you got these computer cards and registered for classes. And I found these bohemian types sitting at a rickety card table with their hand-lettered signs, recruiting for Students for Democratic Society. And I was intrigued by their offbeat look and their ideas. They were radicals who talked about the root causes of problems, about the connections between issues, poverty, racism, war. And their ideas about democracy really won me over. Because in the 50s, I've been taught that, well, at 21, you could vote and pay a poll tax in Texas, and then your representative could do things. But the Greensboro sit-ins had shown us that you could take direct action. And then the SDS Port Huron statement put forth this alluring idea of participatory democracy. You could take action and you could make history, and you could aspire to a very different idea that people should have control over the decisions that affect their lives. Student control, worker control. It was electrifying to me that we could make history and not just be bystanders. Vietnam crept up on us, and in '64, I was taking part in very small anti-war demonstrations. In '65, SDS called the first national demonstration against the war in Washington, D.C. on the Easter weekend of that year. And in Texas, we decided to go where the president was, outside Ranch Road 1. It got national media attention as well, but the war kept gathering scope, and the draft made the war personal for an entire generation. And in '66, a number of us, I don't know if Carol's on this call, but all women met together in secret, and then we staged a sit-in at the Austin Draft Board. Well, we didn't shut it down. They decided that they would just step around us and while we sat in their hallway. But it was just a few months after the Tower Sniper, and one of the survivors, Sandra, was part of our group. So our statement talked about both the violence of war and the violence of school shootings in 1966. In '67, we learned in the spring that Hubert Humphrey was coming to Austin. And so SDS, we didn't have time to get a room in the student union. And we held a meeting on the West Mall to plan a demonstration. And several of us spoke at that. The chairman of the Board of Regents, a certain Frank Irwin, a close ally of the president, showed up personally to ID 6 of us. I was the only woman among the 6, and we were told we would be suspended, and SDS was kicked off campus. And this great, tall constitutional law professor at UT named Fred Cohen showed up to defend us. And a huge, massive student revolt happened, free speech movement happened, and the technicality was really that we hadn't reserved a room. So I always say, well, I was put on disciplinary probation for giving an anti-war speech in an unauthorized location. That was the West Mall. I went to New York in the fall of '67 and began working with a great group still around, the North American Congress on Latin America, doing power structure research and helping Jeff, my partner at the time, launch Rat newspaper there. In '68 was a year like no other year. The Tet Offensive happened early, showing that the US wasn't winning the war. I went on an SDS Cuba trip that was against the law. I watched Rat newspaper roll off the press in March. In April, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and there were uprisings across the country. And then in May, there was a strike at Columbia. And so we did a pamphlet on the power structure of Columbia called Who Rules Columbia? It was one of the first of the power structure pieces of work like that. So I was on campus, it was at night near the business library when the police came charging in through the east gate, and I had on these stupid shoes with low heels. And so I tripped and I gashed my chin and used someone's Barnard ID to get all patched up at a health center, and spent the night on a NACLA friend's couch. And in the morning, I took the subway down to the Lower East Side where I was living with my bandage, a giant bandage on my chin, and blood stains all dripping down my trench coat. And I kept watching. People kept reading the headlines about Columbia and then darting glances over it. And I felt like I was an exhibit A. So '68, August, Chicago Democratic Convention, we took newspapers to Chicago. I handed them out to a line of National Guard who would take them and put them in under their shirt so their officers didn't see them. And one of the things I remember very distinctly is we had a rented van with newspapers in it, and someone said, got to get this guy to a hospital. And Jeff, so we jumped in the van with this guy and some med students from Chicago and go racing across town. Jeff was driving, and then all of a sudden the med students are like, speed up, we're losing them. And we get there, and he made it. His spleen had been ruptured by the police, by billy clubs. So we never learned his name, but that's one of my great memories of Chicago, not great memories of Chicago. September, big uprising in Mexico, and student uprising, and then a worker uprising, and then a massacre at Tlatelolco. And that, so NACLA again did a pamphlet for that. And I'm not quite sure who's on the call right now, but some of the people on the registered helped work on that. And Philip Russell and I went down to Mexico with that pamphlet at Christmas time. Anyway, I began to do power structure research on media in '69 and wrote an article on media for Sisterhood is Powerful. And in '69, well, okay, I also went to Woodstock, 3 days of peace and music. But on a much darker note, the year ended with the assassination in Chicago of Black Panther chairman Fred Hampton. And less than a year later, Carl Hampton, who was no relation to Fred. Did I say Fred Hampton in Chicago? Fred Hampton in Chicago, Carl Hampton in Houston. And he was murdered by Houston police in July. So it was, I guess it was like within 8 months. I came back to Texas from New York, and early upon my return, I made a visit to Mississippi, where Jeff was staying. And while I was there, I heard his side of a phone call that really changed my life. Another Texan, Gary, had been left in charge of Rat newspaper, and Gary called to say the women had taken over the paper. And I think that hearing the put downs, the dismissals of women we both knew as bourgeois and worse, something really exploded in me, and it got really personal. And at that time, among a lot of movement men, sexism was seen as a diversion from the important issues. And I came back to Austin from that trip, and I wrote this: in the safe spaces of women's groups and conversations with women friends, I began to see myself differently and with new eyes. We were bolstered and strengthened by sisterhood, and I could see how my upbringing had shaped me to accept and not to assert, to acquiesce and not to demand to be heard, to type and not to write. And it was so baked into our 1950s upbringing and modeled for us in our families and demonstrated to us by our teachers and advised by our school counselors. And it was also baked into our relationships with a lot of movement men. So these spaces, these consciousness raising groups were like Me Too movements without the internet, where we begin to learn history that was never taught to us. And we begin to realize that our experiences weren't just individual ones. They were shared, and began to understand the way patriarchy had shaped our choices. So I guess in a lot of ways, I was like, wow, why did it take so long to see that? You know, it was after activism in other areas, but it did. The RAG staff, the underground newspaper staff, was bustling with women like Judy Smith, Lynn Smith, Victoria Foe, Bea Durden, and Barbara Hines. And Pat Cuny was there, and women's content was bubbling up, and women's leadership was bubbling up. And there was a women's center that started up, a birth control counseling service inside the RAG office, and then an abortion referral information was being given out from the RAG office. So some of these women urged a very young attorney to file a lawsuit known as Roe v. Wade. So I want to diverge from what I was going to say. And now that SB 8 in Texas has created citizen bounty hunters, I want to read just a bit of what Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor said in dissent with Justices Breyer and Kagan. In May 2021, the Texas legislature enacted SB 8, a near categorical ban on abortions beginning 6 weeks after a woman's last menstrual period, before many women realize they are pregnant, and months before fetal viability. And according to abortion providers in Texas, this act immediately prohibits care for at least 85% of Texas abortion patients. The act is clearly unconstitutional under existing precedents. The respondents do not even try to argue otherwise, nor could they. No federal appellate court has upheld such a comprehensive prohibition on abortions before viability under current law. The Texas legislature was well aware of this binding precedent, and to circumvent it, the legislature took the extraordinary step of enlisting private citizens to do what the state could not. The act authorizes any private citizen to file a lawsuit against any person who provides an abortion in violation of the act aids or abets such an abortion, including by paying for it, regardless of whether they know the abortion is prohibited under the act. And the courts are required to award the private citizen plaintiff at least $10,000 in statutory damages for each forbidden abortion performed or aided by the defendant. In effect, the Texas legislature has deputized the state's citizens as bounty hunters, offering them cash prizes for civilly prosecuting their neighbors' medical procedures. So we're in that's the place we're at. And it's sometimes hard to say, well, carry on as we have been. I mean, when you're faced with this kind of law, and it's happening, I mean, it's the special suppression session really targeted so many things: voting rights, these rights, the right to teach about race, anything that sort of clicked off the buttons. So I remember in the 70s, all the fights, the legal fights and threats of legal action as women became bus drivers in Austin, firefighters, EMS drivers, cable splicers for Southwestern Bell. And it's amazing to me, the Austin Women's Health Organization had as one of its goals to have a woman gynecologist in Travis County. There wasn't one. So we did all these marvelous things, all this, we had a women's cranky street theater that was a low-tech tutorial on women's liberation. And we created women's music, the Sewer Queens and Jubilee. Red River Women's Press began to print in from Fly By Night Printing Collective became Red River Women's Press in 1977 with our great IWW Union Bug. There was women's space counseling, rape counseling, a free people's clinic, nurse midwifery. And I want to go right now. I want to bring in Melissa and have a conversation about what she was doing to discover women's history at this time. And Melissa, where are you? Where are you? There you are.
I'm here.
And I want to tell you that you have something to look forward to here, which is a great PowerPoint if we can make it work. But that's going to happen after we have a bit of a conversation about what Melissa was doing at the time, and also bring in a few questions that people have already raised. Melissa, what were you doing in Austin in 1970 when you got here?
I got to Austin in September of 1973 to enroll in the American Civilization graduate program. I wanted to be a college teacher and get a PhD and write books. I'd been at a women's college for my undergraduate degree where there were archives from women writers, political figures, social reformers from the progressive era, the early 1900s. And I was really inspired by these women and what they had done. And so I was aware of women's history when I got to Austin, but I didn't see much looking around in the libraries, looking around, reading books, talking to people, until one day I was in the library and Glenn Scott came up to me and said, "I hear you're interested in women's history." And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Well, I am too. I'm a graduate student in another program, and I know some other women here, grad students. We're all interested in this. I think we should do something about it." It was the first time Glenn said that to me, and she would say it many times over our long friendship. And we ended up, since the bicentennial was coming and people's history projects were all the rage back then in 1975. And so we thought we're going to do a calendar about Texas women's history. And so Glenn and myself and the three other women spent the summer going through the card catalog. It was called it had a different name. It's called the Briscoe Center now. It was a Barker, Texas History Center back then. And so we actually went through all the cards in the drawers and looked at a lot of material. And we found enough material to make a calendar. Back in those days, you printed on construction paper and it had a spiral binding, and we sold it for $1 on the mall. But that led to a lot of other things. It got a lot of people's interest, and especially Glenn had a great idea. Let's write a grant and make a film about the women that we had learned about who were labor organizers during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And somewhere in there, she said she had another great idea, which is that we should start People's History in Texas. So we formed a nonprofit. We got the grant. We made Talking Union. And Alice partnered up with myself. Sadly, Glenn, as you know, passed away in 2018. But Richard and I and Alice republished the book that Richard and I had edited the time we did the film. And I went on to work with Mary Beth Rogers and Richard, Sarah Weddington, and that group of political women on their exhibit about Texas women's history that opened at the Institute of Texan Cultures in 1981. And through all of that, people's history, women's history, I was around, of course, when many of the things that Alice was doing that she just told us about were going on. And I was watching. I'm a historian by training, but I kept thinking, we have got to document this material. We have got to help people tell their stories. And Glenn was just so committed to that. And we went on, Richard's, I think, on the call tonight. We got some more grants, made some more videos, including working again with Alice and the RAG reunion. Alice and Thorne and Richard did the RAG book, and then Alice had the RAG reunion, and we recorded about 40 oral interviews from that in 2005. It's very important when we were talking about how this would go tonight. Many of you on the call may or may not be thinking about your own memoirs, as Alice has with Voice Lessons. But if you aren't, you need to. We need to know your stories, and we just need them. Just listening again to what Alice says today, despite all the bad news we've had today, is inspiring. And we have, the only way we're going to pass this on and inspire others to keep all this going is through telling our stories. Alice? Lori Green, who's on the call, has history classes where students are going out and interviewing women activists, and those are at the Briscoe Center. So, I think we're making a valiant effort, but there's a lot more that can be done. And in terms of writing down the history, and also in terms of archives that could be given to the Briscoe or another library if you wish. But the Briscoe's been really receptive, and I know I think they have a number of papers from people here. So I really want to push that idea. And I think that it's been really inspiring for me to work with Melissa lately, because People's History in Texas figured out interns. And I was like, oh my God,
younger interns who were eager to work with some of the material. And Melissa, one of the things we have in common is we work for state government, and you call it good government, and much of it was good. I mean, there were good things that happened. So why don't you talk about a project you're working on now with People's History?
Sure. Well, in voice lessons, Alice talks about her time spent working for the Attorney General's office when Jim Maddox was Attorney General in the 80s. I was lucky enough to go on and spend 2 years working for Ann Richards and Mary Beth Rogers at the Treasury during those years. And Jim Hightower was the Ag Commissioner then. And I know many of you know him or were around then. But what I wasn't aware of back then is all the absolutely path-breaking, important work of the people that Jim Hightower brought to Austin, found in Austin and brought into his office, all of the work that those people did. So it was, he's a big personality, wears a big hat. He's a great talker. He's very smart. And he knew, he had a vision. He knew he couldn't do it, but he found people who could make it happen. And we are telling that story now. We've interviewed almost 90 people who worked for Hightower during those years. And they talk about everything from creating the first organic standards for food to how they got the legislature to pass a bill that would stop sprayers from spraying pesticides in the fields when the workers were in the fields working. Started the wine industry, exotic animals, made sure that Black farmers could stay in business, saved a lot of Black family farms as well as a lot of small family farms. And one of the interviews, people we interviewed said was it was government for good, to help consumers, to help producers, farmers, workers, not just the big agribusiness. And that was a critical time. You probably remember, with many farms, family farms across the country were going under, and they went to Washington and helped pass laws there that stopped some of that from happening. So as Alice mentioned, we're old. Richard and I are in our 70s. Heather Ball, who's our third partner in this work, was Hightower's economist. She's also in her 70s. There's lots of new things like podcasts and blogs and interesting things that we know nothing of. But it turns out that UT undergrads need to earn credit, have some hours doing internships. And there's many kids, as I call them, in the history department. We've recently made an inroad into the advertising school there. These are bright kids who want to help, who are, the one we talked to today is taking a class called something about social change movements in the advertising program. And they learn strategy about how to market those things. Just amazing stuff. So we've got help. We got great stories to tell. And Alice has a slide she's going to show us. It's got our website on there too, if you want to learn more about what we're doing. But we had to adapt with the times, and thank goodness there's a lot of kids at UT that want to be part of it. And that's inspiring too. They're very interested in what we have to say, these stories that we have to tell.
And we did, yes, Julie?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to interrupt for a minute and just to tell everyone there are some really fabulous, informative comments in the chat. So please be sure and check that out.
Okay, and then you're gonna kind of give us some hopefully
to read those at some point. Yes.
Right, some of those questions that are coming up. I want to let me address one that Bill Meacham asked me. So he said, we have these two poles of, we were grounded in a moral outrage about the war and other things. And now our opponents they feel a moral outrage. And how do you get around that? And I think that, I was thinking about it as a writer might, the rage part of the moral outrage. And it, I think for a lot of us, we tried so long to stop the war in Vietnam, and there was a lot of rage that built up, and it's, I could understand it then, I can understand it now. But I think it only fuels you for a short time. And so what I said to Bill is that we can't sustain movements that way, and that I prefer to look at Reverend William Barber and his moral awakening notion. We need to be grounded in a moral view of the world, but we cannot face each other in rage. And I don't know if that sufficiently answers your question, Bill, but that's kind of where I went with this. I think it's really important that we try to help younger people live a sustainable life in a movement. And I want to just say, I have a lot of maybe too many thoughts about the differences between now and then, but I was asked a question from Audrey. What have you learned from newer and younger activists? Well, they've come of age with diversity in their lives in a way that in the Jim Crow South, we did not. Even the census was in black and white back then in 1960. It didn't even have the nuances of Latinas and Latinos and Asians in it. It was, so younger people have come of age with a completely different environment. And they certainly have better technical skills. They also have better skills at conducting meetings that are intentionally inclusive and that encourage and amplify the voices of the marginalized. And I think that some of those skills, I like to think, were inherited or, from the women's movement. I think that that there was a lot of change that happened in the 70s around that. And so that's one of the ways I think that things are different. I think if you think about SDS, its first name was students. Well, a lot of the younger generation of activists, they are not coming into this as students. And they also came of age in a time of Occupy, where the 1 and the 99% were pretty clear because the whole economy had crashed. And so I think that they have a very different understanding. I think we came of age in a time when the middle class was kind of expanding in the United States. And so their understanding of what is working and not working in capitalism is completely different. I think they're better at mentoring leadership. And let me just also say, I think they understand and talk about mental health, and we did not. We had a very, most people didn't understand anything about burnout or bipolar disease. Well, we didn't even have that name, or other things. And so in Democratic Socialists, there's even a group of social workers who actually are tagged to help people and to be human resource people. And that's a really different thing, because we sort of hurled ourselves at the world and often burned ourselves out. And I mean, I always go, well, we didn't think the revolution was going to happen and we didn't need to floss our teeth or worry about exercise. So, it's like, no, I think we need we need to give space for younger people to understand that your life changes with kids, with jobs, and that you can sustain activism through all that. So I think that that's something that we have as a gift back. And I mean, we excelled at what I call the narcissism of youth. Don't trust anyone over 30. So God knows we have it coming when the younger generation says, what the hell do you know? And didn't you make a mess of things? I get it, but still, you are not going to make social change in this country if you can't work across generational lines better and across class lines and all of it. I mean, everybody's got to step out of their comfort zone and have conversations. And to Bill's point, maybe not necessarily the conversation that is apparent, reproductive rights and no reproductive rights, maybe not that conversation, but you can usually start a conversation with people about healthcare access, about childcare costs, those kind of things. And so, it's perfectly figuring out how to be sort of agile and having conversations is part of the task we have right now. These are just random questions. Well, they aren't random. Audrey gave them to me, Bill gave them to me, and I don't know what others are in here, but I think it's so important that we, at this time when things look awfully bleak in Texas and climate change is just bearing down on us terribly, that we seek solidarity with each other. We make solidarity with each other, and that's really that kind of community that you can build. And Glenn Scott knew it better than anybody I know. I mean, really, she was so adept at learning people's stories and taking them soup, and I mean, she was just there for people. But she was a great organizer, and so I just, I wish I were like, I don't know, 30% that good, but I spent a lot of COVID just writing this book and trying to work with the Briscoe to make it better. So y'all want to take a little break here and see if I can actually pull off this giant technical challenge of my PowerPoint. I don't see y'all are on mute, so you can't really say no. Is that okay? Haha. Okay, I'm gonna try this. I'm sure it'll glitch up. We're gonna do share screen. Oh my God. And then we're gonna do, okay, and then we're gonna do view slideshow. Ta-da! Can you see it? It's magic. Consulting dorm. Anywhere. Vigil. Sit in. University Freedom Movement. Who rules Columbia? Our pamphlet on Mexico. My beat up copy of Sisterhood is Powerful. Our wonderful street theater. That's Sharon, one of my writing buddies. And this is one of our skits about women's roles. This is Kent State, Alan Pugs on the cover of the book. The witches. I didn't talk about the witches. We hexed the library. Okay. And just to remind us that some things haven't changed. Judy Smith doing abortion referral. Gay Pride, 1971. International Women's Day. Thank you, Robin Birdfeather. And I know you also did a calendar. Sewer Queen Songbook. Jubilee. Love this one. Self-help exams. Fly by night. Red River Women's Press. Poster by Joanne Mullert, a poem by Joanne Mullert. That's our wobbly bug. Oh, CIA Director William Colby. Solidarity with Chile, which I have not spoken of much. Code Pink. Unions, GSEU. Great Resistance. And the Feminist Action Committee. And I wish I could make it stay here for a whole long time, but that's what Melissa was talking about. So I'm going to stop the screen share. Wasn't that wonderful? I'll show it again later. So I did such, thank you, Pat. I love doing these things and sort of bringing that, to life for people. And it's extraordinary to see the South Mall that full of protesters. Extraordinary to me anyway. Anyway, so do you want to try to harvest questions here, Julie, and feed them to us? And I know that some of you want to talk amongst yourselves, and to some degree we can make that happen, but wait one sec. Let me say, I didn't really say before, but I met Carlos Lowry, my partner, doing Chile solidarity work, and Juan Emilio has stayed at our house, Juan from Santiago. It was a really important part of my life for, I think, till 1988, until the plebiscite in 1988 meant that Pinochet, the dictator, was no longer going to be president. And so we did an astonishing amount of work. And it was very, it was a great group. Some of you from that group are here on this call. And I want to say Code Pink, my Code Pink sisters, who have the best skills making the best outfits and being the best disruptive. Wonderful working with you, and also at Under the Hood, the GI Coffee House in Colleen. And so I think that I've learned so much just being really with the Feminist Action Committee, seeing how in Democratic Socialists, how organized they are, how well they conduct campaigns, and canvases and things like that. It's pretty extraordinary to be around that much youthful energy and people who actually know how to do 5 million things on the computer that I don't know how to do. It's a different way of organizing now. We printed up newspapers on offset presses and looked you in the eye and said, "Hey, you want to buy a rag?" And they, this is a lot of what's had to happen in COVID has been virtual. So my Texas Alliance for Retired Americans buddies, we met weekly on Zoom for over a year and a half. And it was only recently that one of the Dallas people, Kenneth Williams, showed up, and I was like, "Oh my God, you're so tall." I had no idea. A wonderful group doing great things on voting rights. And so Audrey, I did get another question here on how do you keep up? Well, you keep up with listservs, you keep up with activism. I learned so much in that Terra group from people that know more than I know. And and Julie and Linda, and who else? Leslie up in McKinney, and we're wonderful. And it's really helped me make it through COVID. because it's this weekly connection with people who care. So now I'll be quiet. Now, do you want to tell us some questions or something?
Sure.
Julie's so calm.
Let's see. All right. One of the very early questions was from Marianne Garner Wizard. And she was wondering who was at the SDS recruiting table and at the all-woman sit-in.
Oh, God. Marion, am I going to have to read it from the book? It's in there. It's in the book. It's in the book, Marion. The SDS, well, okay. At the recruiting table, Judy Schiffer, Pardone, Bob Pardone, Gary Thayer, Jeff Knightman, well, Jeff Sherrill. It was, it was the oldsters. I don't think you were there, Marion. You came later, but I did. And Marion hadn't seen the book, but I want to just say that I told her that her name was on the first page, and it is. It's because Marion said she wrote a poem to me one time, and what was it? Here it is. Shy Alice with an air of good girl going bad. I thought, okay, Marion, you nailed it, and it's true. It's still true. Good girl going bad. So that's who was there. And then at the other thing, you were there at the draft board. Judy Bender Kendall. God, am I going to have to look it up? I'll look it up, Marion, if you want, but it's in the book. Carol Neiman. Not what is Frediger's, what is her first name? Can't remember. I'm gonna have to read it too. Can I have a moment, Marion, and then I'll read you the names. I'll put them in chat. Okay.
All right. Okay, then there are several comments about when you were talking about what's going on with the new abortion law, SB 8 in Texas, just about how striking it is to juxtapose the actions of all of you around abortion just over 50 years ago in Texas and what's happening now, how sinful that is, and how this is also being picked up in other red states, such as Florida, Mississippi, and Alabama.
Well, does anyone, I mean, yeah, I think that one of the reasons that the women who were doing abortion referral work in 1971 and 2 went to Sarah Weddington was exactly because they did not know whether they had legal liability just by telling somebody something. Well, the Texas legislature has gone down that road, and I think we are examples of, well, I mean, I'll tell you another thing, just sort of blew my mind. We're doing a book on Space City News and Space City, the Houston Underground newspaper right now. And one of the things in it are ads. They're ads. Fly to New York, free, low, or low cost, safe abortions. And so what you're going to have, what you do have, New Mexico, Mexico City, New York, people with means are going to be able to get abortions in other states. And it's really people who don't have means and can't take off a ton of time and don't have an airplane ticket that are really going to suffer here. So, Pat, you're telling me it's 8 o'clock. Okay, Melissa, answer a question. I'm going to look for these names.
Okay, some of the next comments are about that you can get in touch with the Austin Women Activists Oral History Project. Give your papers to the Briscoe. You can view, there's a website on how to view the contents of people's history in Texas. And at some point, maybe Melissa, you can give some of that information too about Facebook and the blog and that kind of stuff. Maybe this would be a good time for that.
Sure. We do have a Facebook page, it's People's History in Texas, and our blog is on our website. I think there's a question in the chat also about Ruth Weingarten.
Yes.
So Ruth came to Texas, or came to UT, came to Austin around the time I was teaching, and I met her because her son Mark was in one of my women's history classes, and Ruth and I worked on the Texas Women's History Project together. Ruth was the lead researcher, and sadly, after she died, we did start a foundation in her name. And so there is a Ruth Weingarten Memorial Foundation that does two things. We have a website with a huge amount of information about Texas women's history, books, timeline. You may remember, some of you, the KUT Women's History Moments that we did some years back. And we also publish books through Texas A&M University Press, and have had some books come out this year, honoring Ruth and her legacy. And again, she, like Glenn, really believed in telling these stories. I think Susie Seraph said that she runs a program and has interns who might want to help with projects. That'd be wonderful. What else did I see in the chat? Alice, you back?
I'm back, but I have to answer, of course, Marion's question. And one of the things that just blew me away was the way people sign their names. So four of us who were unmarried signed Sandra Wilson, Julie Cadenhead, Carol Neiman, and Alice Embree. Then some people were like Mrs. Judy Pardun, Mrs. Judy Fitzgerald, Mrs. Judy Bender Kendall. And then some used their husband's names, Mrs. Larry Freudiger and Mrs. G.J. Vizard and Mrs. R. Minkoff. And I kind of like, oh, wow. We were trying, it was a way of trying to appear, I don't know what, mainstream, the way we used to dress up, thinking, okay, if we dress up, then they'll listen to our anti-war message. You know what I mean, Marion? Anyway, I found that very interesting. Those were the names. And somebody said, hey, the slideshow went too quickly. You want me to show it again? I don't know what to say. A lot of this, no, actually not that many were also in the book. There was overlap, but the book has other pictures too. More questions?
Okay. Aaron Purdy posted the website to learn about civil rights and social justice collections at the Briscoe Center. In there, briscoecenter.org/collections/civil rights and social justice. Richard Croxdale posted peopleshistoryiintexas.org, which is fabulous. Personal question for Alice from Aaron Purdy. For those of us feeling despair over the state of our state and union, any suggestions on how to move past that? You talked about that some, but I think that is so pertinent because that is affecting so many of us on a large scale right now.
Well, I mean, we're facing just, so much all at the same time. And so I'm just going to say, try to find a group to be active with that you enjoy their company. So my Terra group on Zoom, I mean, once a week I see them and they're wonderful. And it's just, it's very helpful to, I mean, for one thing, it's a statewide group. So there's always someone from Corpus and someone from Beaumont, and someone from Dallas, and it literally has kept me sane. I think activism, if you can find groups to do anything with, then you get out of your own head. And I'm kind of worried about the Feminist Action Committee, women who have raised money for 5 years for abortion access and suddenly now are literally at risk of being fined for that, going to jail for that. I think I have a package here. I don't know if you can see this. Probably not.
Keep it right in front of your face.
Okay, in front of my face.
There you go.
Controlled substance, emergency contraceptive. It was handed to me at a rally probably 2 years ago. I'm not sure it's still good, but the point is, like, what can we do? And I think we have to remember that women have always figured out ways. There's more there's more ways of medically inducing an abortion if you're in the early stages. So, I mean, I guess we're right back. We're right back there with what's the name of the people that come in? I'm sorry, I'm losing my mind, but all of a sudden we're at the Handmaid's Tale, right? We are with a patriarchal bunch of people making laws that have no respect for very time-sensitive healthcare for women. And a lot of women who get abortions are making an economic decision. They can't afford a third kid. And something I've been thinking of a lot lately is, when we got the relief packages that came with no strings, and I'm talking about the child tax credits or the money that came during the COVID epidemic. And then I must say, I look at the child support program, which was, a lot of that was, well, let's see if we can get that money back that the state paid on Medicaid. Well, it's really the wrong way to think about it. Everybody should have insurance and nobody should be, that program should be trying to get support for children, but not trying to punish people by any means necessary, trying to retrieve funding. And that's always been the kind of the agreement between the Republicans and the Democrats on that program. So it made me think a lot about that program again and the ways that it could be different. So I'm trailing off into other things. Stay active. I sometimes just make little lists for myself and it'll be like, get up, make the bed, do the dishes, and then I can cross those things off. And then I'm like, oh, good, I'm in some kind of forward motion instead of just sitting here in a stupor because things are so bad. So I don't know if that helps. Melissa, can you help us? What do we need to do?
I think you have helped us, Alice.
So I have really gotten a lot of joy out of activism all my life. It makes me feel, good. I like to go to demonstrations. I like to show up at things. I see people that I know, and there's so much that it was, I watched Glenn, and she was very ill with cancer, and out there with a bullhorn, talking about Southwest Keys was I guess the last time I saw her at a demonstration. But she had the same kind of whatever genetic makeup that like, well, what's missing in my life? Oh, a good demonstration, an organizing project. What can I say? I think it helps. It helps to work with people.
And you're right, there are lots of great groups out there. A new group that I just discovered is called the New MAGA. It's Mothers Against Greg Abbott. It's a Facebook group. It is very new. Within probably 10 to 14 days, it went from 0 to over 7,000 members. It started out as a group of mothers that were so concerned about sending their kids back to school with the mandate that, school districts couldn't enforce mask policies. But it has quickly also embraced all the issues that are facing women today in Texas. So if you are at all interested in that, that's something you can look up on Facebook, Mothers Against Greg Abbott. It's fabulous. I love it. So another question to you, Alice, was about whether or not your family was supportive of your activism when you were a student.
You mean my parents? So my dad was a professor, as many of you know. So I always said, well, look, I'm not an outside agitator. I'm an inside agitator. I half grew up on that campus. So, and they were progressive. My dad worked to help integrate restaurants with an ecumenical group, church group. And, they were, but like most parents, like, couldn't you do this another way that's not so combative, And so that was kind of where they were coming from. I was startled when I was put on disciplinary probation to actually see them in the hearing room. I was like, oh no, my parents are here. So I think that I always feel like, because I'm in Austin, I grew up in Austin, I have more ghosts that I run into, ghosts from my past. But my parents, it took me forever to graduate, right? My dad was a professor. I dropped out in 67, returned to school in 79. Anyway, finally got my BA in 82 when I was like 8 months pregnant. And so I'm like, was like, whew, finally, okay. So, I mean, I know that parents, they worry about their kids. Like, I worried about my daughter when she went to El Salvador to work with the committee in solidarity with the people of El Salvador. And I even worried when the FMLN won the election, because it was like, oh no, I think in Chile, Allende won the election. And, I mean, it was hard for me to watch the movie Missing again and then feel like the first time around I identified with the younger people. And then the next time I saw it, I was like, oh no, I'm like the father, worried about the kids. And what were you doing, in Chile? I mean, it's tough. It's tough to, anybody here who's a parent probably feels those kind of contradictions, and anybody here who's a kid, which I guess is all of us, feels those kind of contradictions with the older generation. So, but I mean, the other thing that the kids bring you is like a belief in the future, and grandkids do that even more. It's like, well, we can't give up, can we? Because they're here, we can't give up on them. Did I answer the question? No.
Somebody had asked for some of these links again that are in the chat. I am not tech savvy enough to tell you how to save the chat or access all of that. Again, there are tons and tons of things in there that are good information. So if somebody who is younger and more tech savvy could maybe just raise your hand and I can unmute you unless you're one of the hosts and explain that. Mary Ann, can you do that?
Yes, yes, thank you. Yes, there's a little option at the bottom of the chat that says file. And then next to that, there's 3 little dots. And if you click on the 3 little dots, it says save chat.
Oh,
You see that? It's at the bottom of the chat on the side of your screen. That's a cute picture of Alice.
Okay,
Everybody
great.
see that? So yeah, cool. I'm gonna save it.
Great,
Save
thank
it
you
every
so
time.
much. And then when you save the chat, how do you find it on your device?
Now it says chat saved and it says show in folder. So where did it go? Maybe in my Dropbox, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure where it is, on the computer somewhere.
You can probably go into your Finder
Dropbox or
somehow and search for
something
it.
like that, something like that, yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
And
somebody says it doesn't work on iPad. So
and someone else said try downloads, or it's
yeah.
in your Zoom folder. I don't know.
That was,
But in terms of some of these, some of them are for the Briscoe Center, right? So if you just, search for briscoecenter.org online, then that should bring up the website. And from there, hopefully you should be able to find these other things that you're looking for. Lots of great comments in there, more than I can read.
I think, Sid Hall said, tell us about the witches. Said, did I tell you about the witches? We were the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell, and we hexed the LBJ library at its dedication, and then we got busted. So I always say, well, I got busted is for witchcraft, well, for being a witch. Let me do one thing here and say thank you to the attorneys, and thank you to Malcolm, who got me out of jail in 1976 and then got me out of jail 41 years later at another demonstration. And thank you to, I don't know if Nancy's here, but Jim Simons, who got me out of jail. So, I mean, I think that a lot of the things we did kind of, we rocked the boat a lot. And we had some wonderful movement attorneys, and they're still around, thank God. I mean, a new batch of them are around.
Gretchen McBride has a question she'd like to ask.
Gretchen!
Hi, Alice.
Hi.
Hi. I finished your book today. I want to thank you for writing it. It's really a lot of work. And with glossaries and appendix, it's very, it's a piece of work, and I love it. I loved reading it. In the second paragraph of your introduction, you mentioned the hexing, and I smiled right away. So remembered that one well. I now have a daughter who's 25. She's from Guatemala. I adopted her, and I know your daughter is working. I just so appreciative for this next generation of activists, to have this in their hands, to be able to read about it, I think is a real treasure, a real great thing that you did.
Thank you. It's
Susan
great to
Post
see
also
you.
had something she wanted to share.
Where is Lori?
So I just thank you, Alice. This has been a wonderful bringing together of the past, and you're inspiring us to keep working towards the future and to bring young women, into the circle.